Welcome back, everyone, to the Gamemode Creative podcast, the podcast for Minecraft builders. How are you doing, Rainboom?
I'm good, Meg. It's been a while since we've done an episode, I think, or it feels like eons, but really it's only been a couple of months.
Eons, always.
I'm sure though you listening have been highly anticipating this next episode, so I mean, here we are at long last. But Meg, how have you been in the meantime?
I've been busy catching up on contests. Well, I judged that one contest over the summer, then I participated in a contest. And I also did other collaborations. I've just been busy with everything except my own personal videos, but I'm finally getting back on track with those, kind of.
It's something because Elisa's better than me, where I've been sitting with the same school for the past 4 months, been trying to finish that off.
You've had good excuses,
little progress
though.
Here and there. Well, I still feel bad because I know I've been able to do it before in spite of all my other outside activities, but now it's just been, I don't know. But you know what? I'm sure that at some point, within the next 50 years, I'll finish that school, no doubt about it.
Oh, I hope so.
Fingers crossed. And I may or may not be starting a new build already as we speak, but don't tell anybody I said that. So.
Oh, I mean, we'll just have to tell our audience to keep that quiet too.
Yes.
Don't tell anybody else.
What is discussed in this podcast stays in this podcast. Anyways, no, I know we did have something we were going to talk about amongst ourselves, though, for sure, for today's episode. So, Meg, go ahead and introduce it if you wish.
We're going to talk about some general misconceptions there are sometimes with Minecraft building. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see is that mods or building tools, and when I say mods, I mean not just client-side mods, but also plugins, automatically make you better at building. And recently, I participated in the Building by Hand contest on Builder's Refuge. So it wasn't the first one that they've ever hosted, but I enjoy those contests because it really allows builders to put their true talents on display, regardless of your knowledge of mods or commands. I just want to talk about these mod misconceptions, as I'm calling them, and why we don't need to rely on mods for building. That's generally what I want to talk about.
And also, I think why, if you are worried about being shamed for using mods, why you should not be ashamed of using them. I guess we can take this through a different lens because there are many different perspectives for sure.
I mean, I am one to talk. I use mods and building tools for everything. Yeah. I do tutorials on all of them. But I started out building without any of those things. I think there is value in knowing how to build without them, but then it's also great to build with them just because you can do so much more by using them. But I don't think using them automatically makes you better at building, if that makes sense.
It might make you faster, but then at the end of the day, I think the creativity still stays the same. Because you have to have... I might be jumping in here, but I feel like the idea still comes from you, not from the tool. So 100%, you have to tell the tool what to do if you're to even decide to want to use the tool. But at the end of the day, that idea, the procedure, that plan that you have is still going to come from you, unless maybe some kind of AI-specific tool might come out there. And that, I'm sure, is a whole different topic. We'll
have to save that AI topic for another day.
Yeah, but let's start, though, where you mentioned about needing mods to build well. Or I think you may have somewhat mentioned that. I remember, and I'll never forget this, I think there was one comment that you received. This is when we were talking some couple years ago, and you were reviewing some comments on a video of yours, and one of them said something like, "World Edit built this, not you."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, some people...
That to me was telling of, exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly the misconception I'm talking about, where people assume that the use of mods is doing all of the work for you, when really it's not, because you can have all the knowledge of all the commands in the world and still not be able to build something. I'm not going to say not well, but you'd still have to have that level of creativity, like you said, in order to bring your ideas to life. The commands just help you accomplish that task.
Yeah, at least make it feel less tedious. I know for me, and I have no clue why I never came before it much sooner than I did, with World Edit, even something as basic as World Edit, which now I think is such a ubiquitous, well-known tool that almost I wouldn't be surprised if almost everybody's using it. Now I could be wrong. There might be a whole community of people that still don't. But I remember when I first heard about World Edit, I was going, "Oh, that sounds way too complicated, and it's just going to make things a lot harder for me than they already are." But I was just starting to get into building structure. And I'll never forget that I knew one of the things that was deterring me to really pursue it more was the time it took, because most things I did were by hand. And every time I tried doing commands, whenever I wanted to copy and paste blocks, I think at that time I was even using the super long way of it, which I think was by vanilla commands. I think there was like some kind of set block or whatever the vanilla Minecraft commands were to manipulate blocks was. I kept using that. I mean, for one, the performance time was really bad when it came to me needing to copy and paste a bunch of blocks that World Ed would only take a few seconds, not even. And yeah, so I kind of was just really stubborn and stuck with it until one day, for some reason, I think my mind was opened when somebody took me through a World Edit tutorial and said, "Hey, here's how you set blocks and change them quickly without issue," or things like that. From that moment on, I told myself, "Gee, this is the first time that I've been able to fully understand this mod." I think one of the things too with mods, and part of the misconception, is that they can be misunderstood easily, where you might get an idea of what they do, but you don't get the full picture of what they do. So then immediately thoughts or judgments, so to speak, will start coming to your mind about the mods, where you'll be like, "Oh, that's cheating because it's doing all this for you," or something like that. But Meg, do you remember the first mod that you encountered? Was it World Edit? I'm sure it
I
probably
think it was World Edit, the first thing I tried using. I don't think I got into the vanilla commands. I tried those after trying World Edit, and I couldn't figure them out. They were too complicated.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
How about Archeon? Because that one also, to me, I know when I first saw that was interesting to me, and I was going, this is when I thought World Edit was sufficient enough, and I, for a point, was one of those people that tried to keep my mods as low as possible, because knowing that my devices were usually really, really low performance, low power, you couldn't do much on them, then I kind of got used to working with the fewest mods possible. Of course, when they went server side, it was much easier. But when you came across Archeon, how about that one? I know that one definitely must have been a game changer for you for sure.
It's not always a game changer right away until you actually get to know how a command works and then figure out ways to actually apply it to your build. You can learn commands all day. I could teach commands all day, but unless you actually apply it and use it frequently, you're not going to be able to use it to the fullest.
Actually, you know what? When you mention it too, I was mind-boggled for the longest time, but by Archeon, and I think it was, if not for either it was one of yours, or I'm gonna shout out Shovel, because Shovel was one of those people that also taught me about it, and I think if not for somebody actually showing me the advantages, or saying, "Oh, you could have just done that much easier with Archeon," I would have never seen the potential, because it confused me. The syntax at first, figuring out how to make the selections, and I couldn't wrap my head around how to use it, so I just avoided it.
There's also some people on the opposite side of this where they see using any kind of commands as cheating or, not a legitimate build. I know there's some even creative builders who kind of avoid the more generative commands because it's doing a lot of the work for you. You just type out a generate command and it generates this perfect shape for you or this perfect pattern.
Oh, yeah.
And those are really neat commands, but not everyone is going to be able to apply those to a build all the time. I don't know. There's some people that do not really care for the two generative commands. They like their builds to be more hands-on and, feel like they are the ones plotting out every single block, which is understandable. But you aren't less talented in that case when you are using a mod to assist you in your artwork. It's really weird because yes, you could be overusing them, but also you could be underusing them and you could possibly be missing out on some potential.
I've been afraid of the generate command if I'm thinking of the one where you can put in some kind of mathematical expression and it spits something out, whatever it might be. Or that's one of the generate commands that I know of. And it's amazing what I've seen people do. I myself, though, have been so afraid because I never was good at those kinds of functions to begin with from mathematical
And you don't
perspective.
always
now, there are
need
some
it.
people... Yeah, but there are some people that are truly talented that have a knack for it. And it's actually really cool to see how they apply these curves or whatever kinds of shapes they put into that function or that command, knowing what the shapes are and seeing how they turn out in game. To me, that's actually an art in itself, which is pretty cool. Is it cheating? Absolutely not. I wouldn't think so, because otherwise, how in the world are you supposed to plot that thing by hand
I think
in a
I
game
think
of
it's more of
blocks?
a thing that survival players have. That's more of an issue they have with creative builders. Like, oh, you just use World Edit to make
Generally
that.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then there are also the creative builders that think
Yes.
that there are some commands. Even I am like this, I will admit. There are some commands I'm just like, that's way too powerful. That's too much power in one command. But I don't have a problem with anyone else using it, you know? It's just not...
Yeah.
Everyone's going to have their own commands or mods that they prefer to use over others, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, preferences and those they'd stray away from. But I think the difference maker is where people might try to impose that mentality on other people. That's kind of where the misconceptions and these worries about, oh, am I being shamed for using this mod or not using this mod start coming in.
Or just the misconception that you're not talented if you use mods. That's really what I want to avoid.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I know there are actually, yes, there are some people that I know of that have wanted to, they think that to become a better builder, you must learn how to use mods.
And that's not true
Now,
either.
exactly. The wording, I think, is very important to where it is that you can become a better builder. You can use mods to help become a better builder in the sense of, I think it just takes away the time as part of the process and lets more of your creativity come into play. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you must have mods in order to become a better builder, because technically, yes, all that stuff, most mods that I know just speed the process up of what otherwise would take a little bit more time to do by hand.
Yeah, it's really just
I
a
know
time
there are
saver.
some, yeah. That's it, and that's what it is. It's just to help. Even things like just replacing blocks. Like if I'm going to go ahead and replace an entire set of yellow wool into some other material, am I going to go through there? Oh, actually, a better example is anything that has the stairs variants where you have them in different directions.
How about
I'm not
just
gonna go
deleting
through...
blocks?
Yes, that too. You know, that there's always that. But I was thinking of if I wanted to replace all of my birch stairs that have very specific orientations with spruce stairs, for whatever reason I may need to do that, you know, doing it by hand versus just going with World Edit or some other thing that has the type replace command. I mean, that's a time saver. What would probably take me several minutes, if not more, depending on how big the build was, all of a sudden could be fixed in a couple seconds.
Yep.
Now, the funny thing though, Meg, and I know you know this, that sometimes, actually we kind of do this in each other's whenever we're streaming or building, there might be mods available to do some of these menial tasks, yet we still choose the menial route.
Right,
for some odd reason.
Well,
that I know is a different part of this, but it's just a funny exception because I
Yeah.
know that we both do this. Just because for me, and I think to give you listening some context, sometimes if I'm streaming or even if I'm building by myself and I am deciding to choose to build by hand over using mods or commands, which clearly would save me time, sometimes I don't opt for them because for me, I find that I run out of inspiration, or I feel like I've built much faster than my mind can generate ideas, or I find a way forward. So I find that sometimes spending that time just placing blocks by hand helps buy me a little bit of time just to be able to figure out what I'm going to do next in my build or what part I'm going to touch on next. Otherwise, I'm going to go into fly around my build mode and just get stuck doing that for the next few minutes. So, you know, stuff like that. I don't know, Meg, if you encounter something similar, but...
Yeah, that makes sense. But also for me, a lot of it is sometimes I'm stubborn when it comes to learning a new thing when I've been doing the same, like, oh, I've done it this way for this many years. It's really hard to learn new things. I'm actually kind of in the middle right now. I need to learn easy edits. I need to learn Axiom. I need to learn all of these things. And it's hard when I already have all of these established commands that I don't know already work for me. It's hard to learn new things when I don't really know what I would do with it, if that makes sense. Now, I do have to teach myself a lot of these commands so I can teach them to others, because this is how I make my tutorials. I teach myself the command, make a video about it, and then 90% of them I never use again. But that's just because I have to find like a use for them. I have to actually be using them. And that's kind of hard to do. Yeah, what was the original point of this? I think I derailed it a little bit.
That's fair, but I was just going to add to that to say it almost depends on knowing what the mod actually does. Because for me, if I were to go by just what I've heard and seen from Axiom and Easy Edits, I would have no clue however I'd apply them to my work. So I'd say, well, why am I going to use them if I don't need them? But I'm sure that at some point I will have to delve into them. Or it could be just like with all the other mods that have been introduced over time in my Minecraft playing life, if you want to put it that way, where once I find the need to do a certain type of operation, and then whether it's somebody who says, "Oh, hey, this mod does that," or some way that I get this revelation that, oh, this mod exists, maybe that's when I'll start using it or something. I don't know.
I can't remember if we touched on it earlier, but we do need to clarify this question. Is building with mods actually easier? We talked about it being, it doesn't make you any less skilled or anything. It takes just as much skill and creativity to be able to build with commands and mods, but is it actually easier? I would say in some cases, it's actually harder to build with commands because, one, you do have to know how it works and what you're doing with it, and two, I had a two, and now so.
Well, I'll add to your one to say trial and error can sometimes be tricky with certain mods, and it actually takes more time than just plopping it down right the first time or even doing it by hand. Or with other less sophisticated mods, maybe if you want to go a bit of a longer way to do the same thing.
Yeah, it might take multiple tries.
For instance, yeah, like I still wouldn't consider myself a professional boulder placer. So I know that I still have to figure out how to properly set up the commands, position where I'm looking to get the right effect, so to where I can actually summon these things at will the way I want them to look. Otherwise, I would just have to go, let me just put a bunch of big sphere blobs and smooth them all out later, or some other way that's longer. It may still be using mods, but not as sophisticated as or not as powerful as what else might possibly be out there. So
there has to be at least one example of me choosing to not use mods because, that's going to take too much time. It's much easier for me to do this by hand. I mean, when it comes to texturing, especially, hand texturing is just the best. And most advanced builders do that. Not necessarily because it's easier. It's actually very hard to do. But I guess there's more accuracy involved with it than there are with mods.
Especially, I guess, the fine tuning, right? I mean, probably you can do you can do a general texturing pass with commands and mods, but when it comes to the detailed fine areas, if you're going like on a block
in that case, the mods don't make the texturing process easier per se. Maybe it helps you get a good start. It's easier in the beginning, but to get all the little details, it is not easier. Not always.
And I think that's where good builders come in terms of just knowing when to use them and when you don't have to use them, and you can just go by hand.
Mm-hmm.
Like a quote-unquote good builder. Of course, that is a very, very, very loose definition, but I think that it definitely is. Like it's like you just choose your tools wisely, because there are definitely, I guess for you personally, what might work for you might be different for somebody else doing basically the same type of build, where your building style, in the sense of how you texture or generate things, might be different from the process that somebody else does. So that's kind of, I think, where there might be there's those variations of using mods. But yeah, I mean, for me, I've never found, there might be, again, a few odd cases where I think it'll be just easier to build by hand, but those are like very, very specific structure cases. If I could I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. It's kind of hard to describe unless I show a build that actually exemplifies this, where it's like there's a certain kind of configuration of blocks or something where it just would take just as much time to figure out which blocks to include and exclude. I think it's like when I'm trying to change materials, actually, I think this might be it. When I'm trying to change materials in a selection and I have a whole bunch of blocks I have to mask or something like that, where I could just go through each of these blocks and just change them, because typing out this command, the amount of time it takes to type this command out and figure out what goes into the command is just as long as or maybe even longer than if I were just to go around the build and just do them by hand.
Kind of like what you said earlier about the replacing the stairs and stuff.
Yeah, the stairs. Yes, exactly. But it's like those multi-block selections. You have all these things to think about.
Masks are a game changer for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But then sometimes there comes that point where, well, if I have a certain type of mask of mask combination I got to use, maybe it just makes more sense just do it by hand if there's way too many things I'm constraining. The interesting thing about World Edit, and I'm just going by this because I use this the most, is that I always think of, there might be, if you can think of a concept in mind, surely World Edit will be able to execute it for you. But there are some that are just, a little bit too, they might be a little bit too complex to where it actually might just be more counterproductive to do that using World Edit versus just doing it by hand,
Well, that kind of goes back to the generative commands. If you could spend all this time trying to figure out how to generate this specific shape, or you could just, build the shape yourself in probably less time than it takes. I don't know how some people do. I can't, I'm not a math person. So when I see people come up with all these generate commands, I don't know what's going through their mind to do that. But
oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it probably comes from, I was going to say comes from experience, I think, just knowing what different shapes do and then just amassing all that knowledge and then applying it in specific cases. But
right. And I can just as easily make a shape using my other command knowledge outside of that.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. But I think it's just being able to not be afraid of using those tools, having them at your disposal may help. But they're not mandatory because, yes, everything technically can be done by hand. It just depends on what works better for you and the mods that work better for you and all that.
I would definitely recommend building with and without commands, or at least having the experience of doing both, because I think building without commands gives you a good foundational knowledge of how the pieces of your build will fit together. I don't know. It has a completely different feel to it. Doing that hand building contest has a completely different feel to wireframe your build by hand and to fill it in that way instead of relying on the commands to piece things together. But then having that command knowledge will just help speed up the process as your builds get more complex and larger. Really, the larger the build, the more you might need to rely on commands just because of how much time you can save by doing that.
Oh, yeah. Versus a player scale build.
I just don't want anyone to think that they have to use commands to make a good build. I also don't want anyone to think that people who do use commands are not good at building because they're using commands. There really is two sides to this.
And I think this is great stuff to think about when going into a contest, or if you're just even developing as a builder, because these are probably recurring themes that people, and again, they might just come through the form of comments, and I think this is almost going back to the dealing with trolls almost topic we were once talking about, Meg, where people might just go back and just find ways to pick out what you're doing and make you feel bad about what you're doing.
Yeah, the trolls are always going to be there. Just got to ignore them.
They're always going to be there. And I think it was something about a right versus a wrong way to build, whether that involves mods or not. I don't know if we really went into this in detail, but I mean, I feel like this is very personal too, in terms of personal being what works best for you. I mean, if you are comfortable with just building as you do, if it's by hand and so on, then I mean, hey, go for it. But I would say not to be afraid to go and explore some mods or commands or see what the communities are doing, and if there's some kind of shape or structure or something that catches your attention that you think, hey, that might be kind of cool if I learn how to do it, then that might be a good sign to pick up a mod or something and try it out. Now, I know we're probably likely talking about mods specifically related to building, like directly part of the building process. But then I also know there are mods like Lightmatica or other things that aren't directly related to building, but they might be there as whether they're reference points or other tools that'll help you with whatever you're building. I'm trying to think of other examples offhand, but I mean, those technically still fall into this category because they're there to help you, but they don't necessarily make you any better of a builder or not if you use them. Again, they're just like tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that can take us into the questions related to this because we've reached out to you, as we always have for the past few episodes, and for some questions and things maybe that you've wanted to know about ourselves or something related to this topic. And again, if you ever want to ask these questions, you can always do so in, I believe, Meg, it would be in your server. Is that right?
Yes, in my server, my Discord server.
There's a particular section for community, or I think it was called podcast questions, if memory serves me well, a thread there where you can do that.
We haven't been getting tons of new ones, but we're still working through some of the older ones. And if they run dry, then we just won't have any more questions for a while until we get some new ones.
Or I'll make up a question on the spot. No, I'm kidding. Maybe I'll sign on with a different account just to put something on there.
Nah.
And you won't even know it's me.
Nah, they don't need their questions. They'll be fine.
Okay.
But we do have some questions for this episode. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. No, we haven't run dry yet. That's for sure. I mean, this would end very awkwardly, I think, if we did have no questions.
Well, we didn't used to.
We didn't
used to for like the first 10 episodes or whenever it was.
That is true. That is true. Although I guess we didn't think of having questions in there, but that's okay. Anyway, let's get to the questions before I start losing my train of thought on this. What are 3 commands that aren't usually used that you suggest for advanced builders? Now, I know that's interesting because a lot of people will ask about beginner builders or novice or people just trying to learn commands. But what are 3 that aren't used that you would be suggested?
This is tricky to me because I don't know if I know any specific commands that an advanced builder also wouldn't know. So I guess this is more of some useful commands that if you are looking into becoming more advanced as a builder, this is some that I would recommend. So it's tricky because I'm probably going to mention these and there's probably going to be a lot of builders who are like, oh, I already used that. I don't know what you use, and I certainly don't use every single advanced command out there myself. So I'm just going to recommend some more uncommon ones that maybe you have heard of and maybe you haven't. One of them is the region mask for World Edit. It's been around for ages, which it's funny because I always tell people about this command, but I hardly use it myself. Still, I think it's something that people need to be aware of. Basically, it will allow you to mask whatever your selection is. So if I make a cuboid selection around a part of a build and then I do a G mask, there's 2 of them. There's like one where even if you deselect it, it's going to stay there. I forget the difference though. But anyway, it's going to mask whatever is inside your selection. So then you can manipulate whatever you want in there with other commands and it won't affect anything else.
In the surrounding area. I think so, yeah, probably would.
Yeah, I like it I think it would be most useful when you're painting or texturing something, but I haven't used it that much. I've used it maybe just a few times over the years, but still, if you haven't heard of it, now you have. Another one I recommend is not a specific command, but more of just a mindset when using commands. If you want to get better at building, you have to think about different ways to apply a command. So when it comes to noise patterns, especially, I often see people using a single noise pattern by itself, and it's very obvious. Like, you'll just look at the build and say, oh, look, they used the Voronoi noise pattern on that. However, it doesn't always occur to a newer builder. Maybe it doesn't occur to advanced builders too. I don't know. It doesn't always occur to everyone that you can combine noise patterns to get different textures. So something that I like to do sometimes is use multiple noise patterns together or layer them on top of each other to achieve different looks. That way it doesn't look...
nesting them in a different way.
Yeah, it doesn't look so obvious that you used a specific type of noise pattern. That's not me saying a single command. That's more of a concept of, hey, try mixing your noise patterns next time. It'll make things a little more interesting. I have several of these. My list is more than 3 long. But
well, that'll probably be ours combined. Maybe throw another one in for sure.
Yeah, I've got several more I want to say. Well, the other one was the schematic brush, which advanced builders probably do use that for sure. But if you don't know about it, highly recommend looking into schematic brush. It is so useful for... It's one of those things, though, where you have to kind of find a way to use it. It's not something you can use for everything. I use it for trees a lot. You could use it for anything that requires a lot of repetition. Like, I don't know. It works well on my large organic builds. I don't know if it would work well for a structure build per se. Maybe if you're spreading some trees in the landscape, it would be useful for something like that. But I'm not going to go too deep into that, but that is a whole series of commands and a whole tool in and of itself, but just look into using the schematic brush. And also,
actually could be furniture, I think, from a structure perspective, that it could be used for if you want to randomize the placements of things, possibly.
Oh, possibly. You know, there was another command from Archeon that, I don't know if it was from Archeon, but it was called the asset placer or something. It was some way of saving assets and like loading them in. I don't remember what it was because I never used it, but that just reminded me of it. But I don't know enough about it to talk about that one. The other one that this is the command that I have absolutely been loving lately. I've been a little bit obsessed with it because it's the one quality of life command we have been needing for years and years and years, and we finally have it. And that is the delete position 2 command from Easy Edits. So what it does is if you're using a convex selection, you can now remove the last point in your selection with delete position 2 from Easy Edits. And I even put it to a keybind, or I put it to like control backspace or whatever, so I can just control backspace to delete my last point. It is heavenly. I love it.
This means you don't have to redo your whole selection if you mess up.
It's so nice.
I'm going to have to explore this because I'm going to have to admit, and this is probably to the dismay of bakers, I have not explored Easy Edits yet, so I'm far behind on this. But now you know, they're probably going to drag me into an Easy Edit tutorial session or something to be able to use it. But again, it depends on the application, because unless I need like a complex selection, then I probably won't use it. Unless it depends, there could be some little things here and there. But
anytime you use a convex selection, which I use them a lot more than... Anytime you use the spike command, you use it. Anytime you use...
Oh, I see.
You use it all the time if you're a larger organic builder especially. And then my final answer for this super long question, I have a long answer for it. I just kind of generically put all of Easy Edits is a good thing to learn because I'm still learning it.
Okay,
and
sure. Yeah,
I still have a lot to learn about it, but there are some really great advanced things in it to learn. If you consider yourself already pretty knowledgeable on other commands, then you should definitely try to learn Easy Edits to just expand that knowledge.
Yeah, 100%. I'm stuck as a poly selection builder, so I don't know if I'll have to expand
but the poly
further,
selection is great too. I love that.
Oh, yes. Honestly, that to me was a game changer when that's what taught me how to work with roads, curved roads, because before I used to despise curved roads, so I always built my cities in grids, never bothered with them until I found out that this poly selection existed, and I was like, wow, okay, then now I can start building and texturing and doing all this fun stuff and not worrying about having to use small selections at a time. It was just such a game changer. I'll never forget that day. That was one of my favorite days in my city building life in Minecraft and stuff. That I'll never forget.
I took up all of the answer time to that question. Did you have any more?
Honestly, I think at this point, I don't know if there's much that I can really add, because I feel like I myself am still in that intermediate level of building, because I don't go too crazy on commands. The most I've probably had to do was masking, if I needed to select certain types of blocks or block states or things like that, or even messing with the noise patterns and getting into that sort of thing, or selecting different surfaces around blocks. Let's say making a selection for the air around a certain block, or everything above or below, which is something that actually was new to me. Those little things. Mm-hmm. So I haven't much to add. I'm still probably somebody who's definitely learning.
You definitely need to learn the proximity mask. I love that one.
I've heard of that one, actually.
Yes.
I've yet to actually apply it, but I've heard of that one. That one's a really good one for sure. Yeah. Would you like to read the next question, Meg?
Yes. The next question is, what is the longest build session you have ever done in one sitting? And that's including if you had to take breaks in between, that's fine. But the longest you've sat down and built in Minecraft.
In one sitting? Oh, golly. Well,
whether it be
definitely not a 24-hour stream.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's not a 24-hour stream, but I know a lot of people are asking about that. That's for sure. I'm sure you've probably gotten that same
Yeah,
question,
I
Meg.
can't. How would I ever have time for that when I'm working full time? That's what I want to
Exactly.
know.
Exactly. I'd have to take a day off and hope none of my coworkers or colleagues at work were one of my followers on stream to find out, aha, Rainboom's actually just playing hooky and not actually taking a day off. Um, I would definitely say it is in stream. I don't think I've gone, or have I? It's definitely been at most about 4 or 5 hours, but that's only
Okay.
because I probably had a lot of inspiration for something and time. Time is the big thing. If I
Mm-hmm.
know I actually have if I have nothing to do in a day, it's probably a likely day for me to spend about 5 hours on something. But even then, nowadays, I probably couldn't garner enough focus to do it in that sitting unless I was streaming, for sure.
That last contest I was in, I was building practically a whole day for Saturday of it. There
Hmm.
were breaks in between then, so I really don't know how many hours straight I would have sat and just been building. I know that my longest stream I've ever done was probably around 8 hours with a couple of breaks in between.
Oh, yes.
So I don't know what my longest build session would be. I would say somewhere between 8 to 10 hours, maybe. But see, even then, I would be taking breaks in between, like half-hour break or something, because I can't sit and build for 8 hours straight without breaks,
Oh, I see.
or at least having some kind of food break. But I think that was also included into the question. Like there are
Into the
exceptions
question,
for
yeah.
having to go get food or whatever.
Otherwise, I don't know how people would do it.
Yeah.
If you didn't get up to even to stretch, take a stretch break or look elsewhere from off the screen just to so your eyes don't burn looking at the screen or something like that. Well, actually, one other one comes to mind, and I find that it's only whenever I'm under time pressure to finish something that's when I'll probably sit and just churn out a build session. I'll never forget from several years ago, somebody had. I wouldn't say it wasn't really commission, but it was kind of somebody had hired me on to help build this massive area of sorts. And if I look back now, it's probably nothing because it's probably only like a 500 by 500 space or whatever it was in player scale. So it was a pretty big build, I guess, in player scale. But I had put this thing off for the longest time, and the deadline was coming up very quickly. So as the days came closer, then I found myself sitting in longer sessions, which would be more of those 5 6 hour ones, trying to finish this build. And I could have totally used World Edit. I think that would have slashed the time in more than half. But I did not have World Edit. I did not use World Edit, so the whole thing was done by hand.
Oh dear.
And it was repetitive. It was very very tedious. I'll say that. And even no matter how much music I put on in the background, I dreaded finishing that build. And I think that's also why it took me just that long to finish it too, and why I was putting it off for so long. I mean, it worked. It turned out all right, and I was pretty happy with it. But looking back, when I said, do I want to do another large build like that again? I shook my head immediately, knowing exactly how long it took. But I didn't know any mods yet, so that's that.
Would you like to read the next question?
Sure. Well, this one's kind of a fun change to all the heavy building questions, but asking for favorite flowers is boring. So, what's your favorite tree? Oh dear, I thought this was going to be an easier question.
I think I was obligated to say that I love trees to this question.
Oh yes, I think I know who this probably is then. So, do you have a favorite tree then, Meg?
Here's the thing. My experience with trees is very limited to the realm of Minecraft. I love looking at trees in real life, but I don't know every single type of tree that exists, you know? But you've got your typical
Oh yeah.
Minecraft trees that stand out to you. But even in real life, I will say I do love birch trees because I love the white bark on them and they are beautiful in the autumn. They look so pretty. But honestly, I'm just going to go with the standard answer and say oak trees because a spreading oak tree, they are just the most beautiful trees to look at because they have generally very curving branches and they're just, I don't know, they just have a very dynamic look about them. And they're very,
Oh yeah.
I love all the shade they can offer. I love shade trees. So yeah, I'm just going to go with oak. I love oak trees.
They make great practice for building trees too in game, don't they? Like if
Mhm.
you wanted to get your hand
They
at
look the best
understanding
in
how
game,
branches
and they look the
flow.
best in real
Oh
life.
yes,
Yeah.
oh yeah. So if you ever want to make something semi-structured, semi-organic, there you go. Oak trees are the most fun to do, especially the big, massive ones with all those branches and leaves. And actually, I think it was on an oak tree that I was quote unquote trained for trees. Actually, Meg, I remember you sort of
Ah.
gave me a little tutorial on tree building and how to get the right eye for placing the leaves, the branches, and all that, and mixing the materials. So I credit you for that.
Well, sometimes when I'm building trees, I have no clue what tree I'm building. I'm just building something.
I'm just going to assume it was a standard oak tree. I think it was nothing fancy. It was not a. It was definitely not like a palm tree or a birch tree, but it was just one of those generic oaks. If some kind of maple tree counts, that's what I would say is my
Oh, I
favorite,
love
just
maple
because of the
trees too.
smell, especially whenever the wood is burnt, or if you actually are lucky enough to go and watch the sap being extracted from the trees and stuff. And the leaves are just really pretty too, whenever they fall, or even if they're not falling.
There's so
Just
many
great
pretty
aesthetic
trees.
trees overall. They
Yeah.
really are. No wonder there are some people that love trees.
I don't love palm trees though. That's one tree I don't like. They're just so boring.
You know what's funny? I don't think I've ever seen a palm tree in my life yet. I guess if I ever
They
do
don't
take
give
a trip out
they don't
somewhere
give very
along the
much
coast,
shade. So they're more of a statement piece. They don't offer much in terms of usefulness.
they're more aesthetic than functional,
Yeah,
aren't they?
pretty much. For as far as trees go.
Interesting. So yeah, because I've never been to any coastal places that have palm trees. They're always usually little shrubs or small oak trees or something, or thinner trunks or whatever kinds of trees they are. But I've yet to actually go. Even when I went to Florida, I don't think I had seen a single palm tree. Maybe I was just in the wrong place.
Unless it's like really tall, you're probably gonna miss it.
I guess so. Or maybe I'm just really that oblivious to palm trees, maybe. That I've actually seen them in a previous life and have just decided to completely ignore them now or something. I don't know. But there's another question here, though. It has nothing to do with trees, although I might relate to that. But Meg, you can take it.
Yeah, this one relates a little more closely to our main topic that we talked about. Was there a building tool, mod, or plugin that you just didn't get around to learning, or figured the way you were doing things was good enough, but then later you were actually did learn the tool, you're like, oh, why didn't I learn this years ago? Wow, this is a long question.
Yes.
That revolutionized your technique.
Your technique, yeah. So it's a tool, whatever tool that you said you could have learned sooner but didn't. I have a quick answer for that. That's World Edit.
That's the most basic thing.
of the most fundamental of mods, I think. And it's simply because, again, going back to my apprehension towards it, my computer was not very powerful, and I think running World Edit from, because I had a client side mod of World Edit when I first tried to use it, and just how physically taxing it was in those days on my device scared me from using it. And it wasn't until somebody enlightened me on a server and saying, oh, you can just use World Edit for that. And I'm like, nah, it's going to take too much of a toll. They're like, what are you talking about? This is a server. You can do whatever you want. It'll be just fine. And eventually, I think being on that server just was what got me more comfortable with using it. And I told myself, okay, so as long as there's a server that uses it and I'm not using it client side, I think this actually might work out. Now, that being said, there have been many a time somebody has crashed a server because of some absurd World Edit command that they've tried to execute, but that's a different story. But yes, for me, it had to be World Edit, even for something as simple as copy pasting or stacking something. Because being a structure builder and what the types of builds I was doing that time, roads, skyscrapers, most of them, you just have to stack it and you get what you need.
For me, I think the one thing I should have learned sooner, but I just learned it last year or just started using it last year, was the debug stick.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I never, who knows how many years that's been around, probably forever. And I've never, ever learned how to use it until last year. I didn't know it existed until last year. And I'm like, oh, that's a thing?
Yeah.
Oh.
Uh-huh. I think for me, it was in that category of structure block like things where I'm going, okay, these are probably just back-end useful things, and I didn't even know what they were for. And I know people that are experts at the structure block, but I used to lump the debug stick in that same category. It wasn't until another member of the bakery community actually had been known for using the debug stick a lot in their builds. And this was early in those bakery days. And I used to think, oh, they're crazy for clicking on these things all the time with a debug stick. Until I found out myself when I started using it.
And then once you start using it, you get addicted and you feel like you have to use it for everything, even if you don't necessarily need to. That's the problem. It's addictive.
Exactly. Honestly, actually, Meg, this was also in a time when you were teaching me how to use the replace tool. I remember one of the early days in my city building stream where I was replacing some of the hill textures or the road textures, I think. And you were going, Rainboom, just pull up the replace tool and right click it, and you're going to do the same thing instead of breaking and replacing a block. And I was going, well, look, I in my mind, I was thinking, well, I can click just as fast. I don't think I need this, until I found out how powerful it was in tandem with the debug stick. So if I wanted to create fences and not have to go do all the debugging individually, and I was like, okay, this is a game changer. So even something like that to me was already mind-blowing. But yeah, stuff like that. And I'm sure that there'll be more that as I continue to explore myself with all the mods available.
Oh yeah, there's always new stuff coming out and there's always new things to learn. So whatever answers we give now, they're probably going to be different even just a month or two down the road. So
I might laugh at myself again if I listen to this episode several months down and realize, okay, that was just scratching the surface of mod discoveries here or something like that. But there's just a lot, honestly. I'm still selective of what I use because it's just whatever feels best for my current workflow and just whatever I feel comfy with. And I think the same, again, goes with you too, in summary, really. So you don't need mods, but don't be afraid to use them.
That's a good way to summarize it.
So they're there as tools, pretty much. But I think, yeah, that's a good way to put a wrap on the episode in a sense. So now comes the time for our own shameless self-plugging, doesn't it?
Sure. If you would like to, follow either of us, we both are on Instagram. We both have YouTube channels, although you have your other podcast mainly on your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, I think right now it's torn between the two, but I do plan on, if I have video content that I want to share, like that brioche video.
Oh yeah, that's true. You do have the occasional video, and then the occasional Twitch stream. We both stream on Twitch. If you want to follow us on there. But
my internet's still bad, so that's one of the other things too. I'm sure that has been a bit of a hindrance for me to continue streaming. But I'm sure, we'll see. The next episode maybe it might be better.
And you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. So whichever one you're listening to it on now, there are other options to listen to it as well. And usually you do the plugging, so I'll let you finish.
Well, I guess you found us exactly where now you know, where if you haven't already known, where you can find us and the podcast. I have nothing else to plug, I don't think, except just to say thank you for listening to this episode. And until the next one, we'll see you then.
Bye.